world surrounded by franchises, reboots, and shared universes. An elite team of podcasters will risk body and soul to investigate the depths of intellectual properties, one multiverse, subgenre, and trend at a time. Who are we? We're the IP Squad. Welcome back to the IP Squad and our ongoing investigation into the Alien and Predator film franchises, and when there are two franchises and one franchise, and this season is all about, mix them, match them up. My partner, of course... Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes you need your two action figures, and sometimes you need to jam them together.
This whole franchise is definitely... this is the one, by the way. This is the week it becomes an action figure franchise, right?
Correct, yes.
I'm John Campbell. My partner for this investigation, as you're hearing now, Mike Gergoni.
I am Mike Gergoni, and yes, I had all of the toys from this movie.
Oh, God. I mean, that's the thing. We were talking about this last week. We are Aliens kids. No question, right?
Again, I would like to specify the failed cartoon series that spawned a toy line that I owned all of, not necessarily this specific movie.
But like the aesthetic of the Alien franchise, as we know and love it, is really born in this movie. And I think for a lot of people that's the case. I think this is one of those franchises where people are like, "Wait, that was in the second one."
Every Alien-based video game I have played is borrowing things from this movie basically exclusively.
Except maybe for Isolation.
Even Isolation uses
borrows
the motion tracker and like...
Because this is the movie where not only are we saying this is the one that spawns action figures, and I gotta say, I have a whole shelf of Alien action figures now, and they're all from this movie. I have my Corporal Hicks, my Ripley in the Power Loader, The
redesign of the Alien itself really comes down to this movie.
Like Queen,
no offense.
Also,
I really love everything about the first movie, and the colloquial term for the alien in that movie is referred to as Big Chap. Is the large alien in the first film, Alien. Right. The redesign in this film is cemented in my brain for what the xenomorph looks like, with like the ridges on the head and like the longer protuberances on the back and the really like highlighted scorpion like tails that we get in this movie.
Well, that's the thing I was going to say about this. Like I said, like this is the act we were talking about. This is the thing that spawns toys. This is also the movie that has all the toys. It's got the weapons. It's got the ships. It's got the vehicles. It's got the costumes. Every character has their own distinct look in a way that, like, purposefully everyone was uniformed in the first movie.
Now, I can already hear the rumblings somewhere in the distance, a susurrus of whispers in the air vents of our podcast that are saying... It destroys the franchise. It ruins the horror aesthetics. My God, James Cameron, what have you done?
Well, because, yes. And the response to that is, and here's the thing I was thinking about last night as I was doing research for this and stuff like that. Because this is a movie I did rewatch, though I did not have to. Because I've seen this movie. This is legitimately not only my favorite of this franchise, this is just one of my favorite movies. I throw on Aliens so much. But here's the thing about it. Ridley Scott, and I don't feel like I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this, maybe from some people. Ridley Scott is objectively a much better filmmaker than James Cameron, like as an artist. However, James Cameron
saying the word objectively and artist in the same sentence is a bold move.
It is, but I'm saying like at least in terms of like the first one is the like masterpiece, right? Like by that's on like the Sight and Sound list of the greatest movies ever made kind of thing. However, James Cameron is one of the greatest populist filmmakers. Like, as a craftsman of blockbusters,
Yeah.
Ridley Scott has always been a guy who has made successful movies, but has always felt like he doesn't give a shit if they make money.
There is a sort of, I am crafting a film to a vision that I have. Whether or not you are on the same wavelength as that film is a you problem, not a Ridley Scott
Because that's the thing.
problem.
It sort of feels like Alien became a blockbuster, and Ridley Scott's like, that's great. That'll make me more. But then he does Blade Runner, which is a brilliant movie, but nobody saw when it came out. And I'm sure he was like, I don't fucking care. That movie's amazing. Like, whatever. Like, that's always sort of been his attitude. If it's more just like, oh, that was a hit? Great. Whereas James Cameron feels like everything he puts into these movies, and this movie you really feel that, because this is the first big blockbuster Cameron movie. This is his third film as director, following his debut of Piranha 2: The Spawning, a classic, that I'm sure he would be glad if I didn't mention. Then The Terminator, which of course turned into a big hit, but people forget that first one was basically an indie movie. It's a super small scale. It's a great movie. It's incredible what he pulls off. It's one of those movies where you're like, God, I can't believe that cost as little money as it did, because he just shot the hell out of it.
Basically a slasher movie.
100%. It's a monster movie. Everybody's running away from a scary monster. This is the first time that a studio's like, all right, we're trusting in the Jim Cameron vision. And you can feel, and this is my favorite of James Cameron's movies, because you can feel every moment he is thinking about, this is where I want the audience to scream. This is where I want the audience to cheer. This is where I want the audience to clutch their seats. Right? Like, you can just feel he's playing the audience in this movie. And that's why I'm saying I think is a bit different than Ridley Scott, who is thinking about this artistic, canvas he's painting.
Ridley Scott is creating a mood. James Cameron is producing a roller coaster.
And that has always been his great gift as a filmmaker. No question. As much as I bag on, I always talk about up to Titanic, I think James Cameron is one of my favorite directors. Post Titanic, the guy went so far up his own ass, he doesn't know what the world looks like anymore. But the guy has always been very, very good, even still to this day. As much as I may not enjoy the Avatar franchise, he's been very, very good at selling people an experience. And that's my big issue with the Avatar movies, is I do think they are more experiences than they are they are narrative films. The guy has never been, because like the big criticism of Cameron always is he's not a good writer, and he's not, and that that's not the criticism I'm leveling him. But I will say is he is a very generic writer, purposefully, right? Because like he plays very classical tones.
He is a workman-like writer.
Yeah.
He knows what story needs to be there for the roller coaster to work, for the moments where, like you say, he plans the scream, he plans the audience reaction in a moment-by-moment basis, the things he needs to string together, those sequences outside of a literal roller coaster. Do we know what his involvement was in T2 The Ride? I don't know precisely.
Quite a bit.
But yeah.
I do know. Yeah. Theme park history is actually a huge passion of mine. So
he is, I would say, very good at creating functional stories that help him pull off the visual and entertainment factors that he is building into his
He's
movies.
A hyper technical filmmaker. And so is Ridley Scott, but they're going after different things.
Right. James Cameron is about spectacle, and again, I think Ridley Scott is about creating mood.
Yeah, which makes sense, because Ridley Scott comes out of like formal art school, whereas James Cameron is a movie nerd, and is into all the. And this movie also has the thing that's so interesting about when you watch this again. You do see like the seeds of everything Cameron will continue making. Like, there's so much Avatar in this movie, it's crazy.
That is what I was struck by the most when I was rewatching this film, both last night and this morning. I split it into two little chunks. Is this movie is such a blueprint for everything else in James Cameron's career, in my opinion, where Terminator is not at all, really.
That's his calling card movie, right? That's his I have a little bit of money, look at what I can do. And it is incredible what he pulled off.
But yes, you're right. There's a lot of Avatar in this, or Avatar has a lot of aliens in it, at least in terms of like people in mechs and guys with guns and
Yeah.
men on a mission style of movies.
That aesthetic has
Uh,
always appealed to him. It's very interesting because the other big Hollywood project he worked on at this same time was Rambo 2.
yeah,
He
yeah,
and
yeah. Well, he
Stallone,
was just credited as the writer for that. Yeah.
yeah, he and Stallone wrote Rambo First Blood Part 2. But I'm saying I think it's very interesting
Mhm.
that like militaristic action sort of, and also I think that movie is, it's interesting that when you bring Cameron in on that, that's a similar thing where the first movie, the first Rambo movie, First Blood, is dark and it's seriously talking about PTSD. And then movie 2 is the pumping your fist as Rambo shoots a guy with an exploding arrow. You know, that's definitely the thing he's good at, is like, let's pump up the energy. Let's leave people leaving the theater pumping their fists and going, fuck yeah, that was awesome.
But there's also this obsession with technological minutia in Cameron's
Oh
movies
yeah.
that you can see start here when it comes to like explaining how the rifle works
Yeah.
or knowing how all of the little cameras on all the soldiers' heads are functioning and like visually getting across how everything sort of locks together in this grand machine that he has in his head. And you see way more of that in something like The Abyss. And even in Titanic,
Yeah.
you like get this calculated walkthrough of how the boat works so that when it all comes apart in the third act, you know how all of the pieces function as they're breaking.
That's also like how he makes movies, right? He's a
Yeah.
gearhead. He's a guy who's like, oh, the cameras can't do this. Well, I'll build a camera that can do it, and I'm gonna, and that's also why we've not gotten many James Cameron movies in the last couple decades, because he keeps doing stuff where he's like, hold on, I've got to spend 10 years building the technology to make this movie.
Yeah. I need to be able to have actors who can functionally breathe underwater
Yeah.
in order to film my next
I
picture.
mean, I will
So,
say this.
get to work on that.
We're never going to
Sam
talk
Wentworth.
about it because it's not part of an IP thing. So go and read about the making of The Abyss, because that sounds like the worst fucking experience I've ever heard in my life. He almost killed everyone on that movie, including himself. I can't believe that. The other thing about Cameron, and we'll talk about this a lot in the making of this movie, famously difficult. Famously, there's a lot of people who love Cameron and keep coming back to him. Several of them are in this movie, but there's probably even more people who are like, I will never speak to that man again. Ed Harris won't talk about The Abyss because he has legitimate PTSD from the experience.
I mean, wasn't he also the guy who like threatened James Cameron's life on set?
He punched him out and was
Supposedly?
like ready to kill him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because he almost killed Ed Harris. Yeah. But like
Yeah,
Ed Harris would go
exactly.
home crying at night, just uncontrollably sobbing in his car on the ride, because that movie was anyway. That's where he takes this. That's the movie he makes after this. The other thing
Right.
I'll say to say something nice about Cameron, and I think this plays into his blockbuster mentality, and also the idea of him as a bad writer, which once again, I don't think he's a bad writer, but I don't think he's a great writer. However, what he is, he once again, because I think he's a very good audience-minded filmmaker. He's certainly in the top 5 greatest one-liner writers ever. How many iconic lines from his movies are thrown around in pop culture? Because that guy knows how to craft that one specific line that people are going to be like, oh, yeah. I mean, I'll be
I would say-
back. Hasta la vista,
Yeah.
baby. This movie has like 3.
Even like there are some minor lines in here that I recognize as like something that is oft quoted
Yep.
through both video games and other movies, like in the pipe, 5x5.
Yep.
Like I know that's just like a pilot thing, but I hear it from aliens.
Yep. They mostly come out at night. Mostly. Yeah. He cannot take credit for, because it is a Bill Paxton improv. Game over, man. Is a Paxton.
Yeah.
But get away from her, you bitch. I mean, talk about the moment where it's like perfect. That's so perfectly constructed for the audience to be like, yeah, oh fuck yeah, Ripley.
No, and
yeah.
the movie does a really good job. Again, Cameron loves setting up little bits of technology in early stages of a movie that will then pay off later. The loader suit, obviously, how the loading bay of the how do you say the the spaceship name they're on.
Oh, I don't. As many times as I've
The
seen
main
this
spaceship, they're on the Sulaco.
yeah, I believe that's right. Solarco?
But how like the bay doors work in that, how the airlocks work, like they set all of that up in that opening scene with the Marines, and it all pays off in the final fight with the Queen,
Well,
right?
because that's the thing is like Cameron is not. He's a very satisfying, right? His scripts are very satisfying. The math of them really adds up. They are not super deep. I think that is a fair criticism of them. He relies on a lot of tropes from other movies, which is where some of the things that piss me off about him are his like, no man, I'm not inspired by other movies. It's like, well, all your movies are the most generic movie tropes, so that's very interesting to me that you would say that. But the thing about that is, like, I think there's some part of him that feels like we would think less of him if he said that, but it's just like, well, no, of course that's what you're doing, but you're using that for a reason. He's using a lot of shorthand so he can get to the stuff he is really good at. You know, like all the characters in this are really good, but they're all very surface level, which is not a criticism of the movie.
The Sulaco.
The Sulaco. Okay, there you go. Yeah.
But no, he does that so that he can convey like simple ideas really quickly. And so like especially when we're being introduced to all of our characters here, the only character with any real depth in this film is Ripley, right?
And a lot of that is carried over because we have the benefit of knowing the trauma she's dealing with from the first movie.
But even then, like we get hyper specific focused scenes about Ripley's PTSD in this film.
Yes.
Everybody else is effectively a stock character.
And a lot of them are literal cannon fodder, of course. Like when you meet the Marines, right? You're just like, okay, well, it's going to come down to like two of them that you're going to care about. So like, Hicks the best, but a lot of it's just because he lives through the whole movie and gets enough scenes that, you're and like...
But even Hicks is barely a character until Gorman gets taken out.
Right.
At which point, this all comes down to Michael Biehn's performance of just this resignation of like, I guess I'm in charge and I'll do a good job because I'm in charge.
Well, he's a real... I mean, once again, Cameron's is an action filmmaker. So you look at Hicks, who is my favorite character in all the Alien franchise. Of fucking course. As a kid, I just was like, Hicks is the biggest badass. But a lot of that is what I'm saying. He's an action filmmaker. A lot of Hicks's character comes through in what he does, his actions, and so I think that's a big thing too. Is like, yeah, I mean, like the most you get about him is he's asleep when they drop the ship, and you're like, oh, this guy, and he
can ride through the storm and not be fazed by it.
He's the battle hardened warrior of the group. And it's fun because then when you see that Gorman is not the guy in charge of this, because the whole thing about like, oh, I've been on 2 excursions, well, technically only really 1 that saw combat. And so immediately they're like, oh boy. Meanwhile, the guy who's sleeping on a dropship, because this is just a day-to-day job, of course that's going to be the guy who's going to have to take charge.
Yeah.
It really works.
Gorman's line, I really did like that. It's just like, well, how many drops into actual combat have you had? Well, 2, if you count this one.
Yeah, if you count this one, this is And so then, and once again, we talk about the satisfaction of that is they set that up. You're like, oh no. So then when he's panicking, when everybody's getting attacked by the xenomorphs, you're like, well, yeah, they set that up. We know this guy's inexperienced. The other thing he was very smart, and Cameron has always been very smart in doing, because he is not maybe the most character-focused filmmaker, is he does get great actors and great individualistic actors. And so that's the thing about even the characters who get killed pretty quickly when the Marines land. Everybody has a sense of being a real person in this. You know what I mean? Like everybody has at least a little bit of a thing to them.
I feel like we get characters out of basically everyone. Look, there's a couple of names that get thrown around while they're all getting slaughtered at the bottom of the reactor complex.
Spunkmeyer and stuff like that. Yeah.
Crow. Like, who was Spunkmeyer? Oh, he was the co-pilot. Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
Where's Bowski? That name gets shouted a couple of times.
Yeah, those are the guys who go down. But yeah, your main crew of Hicks, Hudson, Gorman, Vasquez, Apone, Drake, and Frost. you get at least a taste of each of them. A little bit of a vibe to varying degrees. And the ones played by the actors you recognize certainly help, right? Where you're just like, oh yeah, well, Paxton's probably going to be around for a while. And Paxton is I think still has been in the most Cameron movies of any actor. Like that was Cameron's guy.
Mark Rolston, who played Private Drake,
Yeah.
but haven't really seen him in much.
He's around. He's one of those guys who's like in a scene here and there. He plays Norman Osborn in the Spider-Man games.
Sure, and he played Senator Doug Gauntlet in Tales of the Jedi.
Yep.
I think he was that asshole who Count Dooku almost killed.
He's in one episode of Ahsoka. Character actor, pops into stuff. Yeah. I know him from Bosch. No surprise there.
Shocker.
Yeah. But he's that guy. He's around.
Does a lot of voice acting. He was in 12 episodes of the Netflix Voltron.
There you go. I mean, so yeah, these guys are around. But yeah, these aren't, when you see Bean, Henriksen, Paxton, especially to guys like us, those are genre favorites too, right? I mean, like, there's no question that the thing about Bean, and this was also a big reason why I loved Hicks as a kid, was, of course, I also loved Kyle Reese in Terminator. So Bean as a kid, being a kid who was way into science fiction and action movies, and particularly ones that combine the two, Bean is a fucking icon to me. My whole,
totally.
He's the coolest son of a bitch that's ever been on screen, basically. So then when he shows up, in one episode of Mandalorian, you're just like, oh, of course the badass intergalactic gunslinger is Michael Biehn.
Yeah, or like one episode of The Walking Dead, he shows up.
Yeah,
and it's just like, oh, of course he would survive the zombie apocalypse.
He just did a guest shot on Law and Order: Organized Crime, where like even Elliot Stabler was like, "This dude's pretty badass."
Well, and I love it when he shows up as a voice actor and stuff as well. I mean, him and Henriksen, honestly.
Oh yeah. I mean, can we just quickly mention Blood Dragon? Far Cry Blood Dragon, because talk about getting the assignment. That Bean totally got. Okay, I see exactly. You need me to be the hyper stylized version of all the characters I played in the 80s. Got it.
Look, when he gets to play Sergeant Rex Power Colt.
Oh fuck yeah!
The fact that his nickname is Power in that game.
They call me Power. Rex Power Colt. He's the best. He rules in this movie. One of the coolest things to say about this is, and I'm sure, I don't know if you know this, he was cast like a day out from filming.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Because this whole movie, they went into production with James Remar as Corporal Hicks.
Interesting.
And then Remar got busted for cocaine possession in London.
That'll happen in the 80s, yeah.
He's pretty open about he had some serious substance abuse issues at the time. But yeah, they were over shooting this movie in London. He got busted, and James Cameron called up his friend Michael Biehn from Terminator. He was like, how fast can you get to London? So, I mean, he came into this movie cold. Everyone else all the other Marines had been together for weeks doing training and stuff like that. Nope. Biehn showed up and was basically in costume and on set immediately. So,
wow.
Amazing how great his performance is for having no prep at all.
And again, a lot of that comes down to what's so fun about the Alien franchise. One of the things that's fun about it is the development of who's going to be the last person alive in these movies is always in every single one of the movies. And I think that's something actually pretty consistent across the franchise is you never quite know who the main characters are going to be going into the movie. Obviously, you have your leads, your Sigourney Weavers,
right,
and what have you. But the way the cast is thinned out in these movies until you kind of realize who is going to be our final people walking into the third act is always... You never quite know in most of the Alien movies.
What's so great about this is we got to talk about the character of Bishop, because Bishop is such a great character, but also the way it's used of playing on the knowledge of the first film, both ours and Ripley's, of like, oh shit, android guy. And played by Lance Henriksen, who, let's be honest, we've seen go any number of ways in terms of being good or evil on film. Also, Henriksen back with Cameron, also from the Terminator. In fact, Henriksen was who Cameron wanted to cast as the Terminator originally. Because his
Yeah.
initial idea was that the Terminator would be a nondescript guy who doesn't stand out in a crowd. Sort of what he ended up doing with the T-1000.
In theory, good, but in practice, I think not nearly as iconic.
No,
Right?
it ended up working out. And like I said, he kind of then gets to do that with Robert Patrick in T2. Stay tuned for we will definitely be doing a Terminator season of the IP Squad. That franchise refusal to die is
Man, Henriksen just works. Good God, I'm looking at his IMDb page right now.
Oh my God.
And like I've been scrolling for the last like 30, 40 seconds. I still haven't gotten below the 2000s.
266 acting credits as of the recording of this. I mean, just one of Hollywood's most solid players, I would have to say. Just a guy who's gonna crush. You know, you bring him in for a scene or two, or he
shows up, he does the job.
Yep. Did you play The Quarry by any chance?
No.
I'm not surprised. It doesn't seem like a Mike Ergoni game. I loved it, of course.
One of them scary games.
Yeah, because the whole thing is a tribute to 80s horror, but he's in it, and he's fucking great in it. He's so good in it.
What I played, and I'm still in the middle of playing with him in it quite extensively, is the Mass Effect franchise.
Yes. Yep. Also in that.
He is all over those games, especially the third one. And you can find that over on our YouTube page, youtube.com/@punchupentertainment, where Elliot Lewis and I are playing through the Mass Effect games. You can hear us taking orders from Lance Henriksen.
There you go. Absolutely. Already he's also in Detroit Become Human as well, which is a game I enjoyed. So he's doing a lot of work across lots of voice work, lots of on-camera stuff, lots of mocap for video games as well. He's a guy I'm always happy to see. And once again, if you're a genre person, he's been in so much sci-fi and horror, and
Totally.
And this was there's a piece of the trivia that he's like, if this doesn't hit, I'm quitting acting, is what he said after this, because he had been so frustrated by having to work his ass off to get parts for so long. He was just like, this is such a good character, this is such a good script. If this doesn't send me into like getting offers for movies, then I'm done, because I so see what to do with the character of Bishop that if this doesn't keep me in studio executives' minds, I'm out then. I just don't. And of course, it did, and he's worked forever, as we've talked about, because he is so good in this movie.
His performance is understated, but he rides this fine line because you always are going to compare him to Ian Holm, right? In the first Alien. And Ian Holm played it very creepy and meticulous and like kind of stilted, especially with the like retroactive knowledge about what he is going into that movie. You can see the stillness that Ian Holm is playing in scenes. And Lance Henriksen could have really easily gone that same way and built this level of distrust that Ripley feels for him in the audience. But he plays it like still calm and collected, but more warmly than Ian Holm did.
The thing I was thinking about on this view is earnest. Bishop is very earnest, right? The way he's just like, because when the scene where she finds out he's a synthetic, and she's like, "You didn't tell me anything about that." And then Paul Reiser's explaining, like, and we'll talk about Paul Reiser in a second because he's so fucking good in this too. But when he's just going like, "Oh," and the way part of Reiser's great performance, the way he's just like, Ripley was on a ship where one of their synthetic malfunction, not tried to kill her. But the way Henriksen is just like, I am shocked to hear that. And then they're just like, well, it's one of the old. Well, if it was one of the older models, that makes sense. See, I'm actually and it's just he's so like, no, look, I'm fine. I'm here to help you. I'm this. And what I love is, you're expecting the turn. Cameron knows you're expecting the turn, and that he just stays that purely earnest character the whole movie is great until eventually it's Ripley who has to change and be like, actually, this guy's great.
You know what, Bishop? You did good.
And then you're heartbroken that he gets ripped in half. I mean, what a gut punch. And then still even ripped in half.
Gut rip.
Yeah, still ripped in, torn In 2, he still manages to save Newt. Because that's how awesome Bishop is.
No, yeah. Look, we love a good robot trying to be a person, right? Like, that's one of my things in movies.
Yeah.
Is I love robots trying to be people, and Bishop with this earnestness throughout this film, even when he's being stuffed into a pipe, is just like.
By the way, I'm not even a claustrophobic person particularly, and that just gave me every time he goes into that pipe that is just as wide as he is. So yeah, that's freaky and doesn't have anything to do with the aliens. And speaking of that, the crazy thing that Cameron managed to, because one of the things that this movie is often spoken of as like a blueprint for a perfect sequel is this idea that like, okay, I can't recreate the tension and scares of the first movie because people know what's coming to a certain extent. So the idea of changing genres basically and turning this into a war movie, as Cameron was pitching. But the thing that I think is amazing that he still managed to pull off is keeping xenomorphs out of it for like an hour.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, right? When the opening scene is a dream sequence where a chest burster is coming out of Ripley.
He does the classic, and this is something we talk about Meet the Monsters a lot. He does the classic thing, which is, I'll give you a little bit what you want right up front, so it'll buy me another half hour where you don't have anything. You know, you show a werewolf attack at the beginning, and then you're like, okay, yeah, I'll go a whole act of the movie without there being werewolves or whatever. He does, it's like, we're still in an alien movie. Don't worry. But see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, and look, there is something to be said about how schizophrenic this franchise can be, and that being a result of this film, right?
I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but that is very much what will be the case going forward when we talk about alien movies, is there are these two poles of Alien and Aliens, and basically every movie we get from here is just bouncing between them.
Right. And you can either have people saying, well, we're trying to get back to the original, or we're trying to be like Aliens. And between the two is a perilous middle ground that no one has really quite gotten a handle on.
I think one of the biggest things this franchise needs to acknowledge going forward is you're never going to be as good as these two. Like, these two are masterpieces. When we do that Terminator season, we'll talk about the exact same thing. Those first two movies are fucking perfection, and you're just watching this franchise flail around. I think the Alien franchise is more interesting in a lot of its failures than the Terminator franchise. The Terminator franchise gets embarrassing eventually.
We're looking at you, Genesis.
Oh, Jesus, Genesis is so bad. And then Dark Fate has all of its own problems. You know, when Rise of the Machine starts looking good at a certain point, you're like, oh boy. And I have certain affection for Salvation. So there's a preview of that season. I think Salvation was on the right track, if flawed. Now I'll leave it at that.
I'm so curious going forward into this franchise, whether or not there will come a time where we will look fondly on Alien Resurrection. We'll see.
I guarantee it, because I do not hate Resurrection, but Resurrection.
You hate 3 though.
I hate 3, and unfortunately, Resurrection is also just doomed by having to make peace with 3. Right, like in certain ways, there are just things that Resurrection has to do because it comes after 3, which are unfortunate. Its placement in the franchise is unfortunate. Future preview for the future. If you're an Alien 3 fan, maybe go ahead and skip that episode, or just be ready for John to be very, very mad during it. Which is a lot of that is because of my love of this movie, but we'll get there when we get there.
Sure. But this movie is establishing a tone that kind of defies its predecessor in a way. The first movie is a haunted house movie in space. This movie is an action film with lots of scary aliens, but they're scary for different reasons. There isn't that quiet, contemplative terror of the first film. This movie is, we're going to be overwhelmed by something we can't stop.
And I swear this is not a pull quote. I literally did just think of this, but it's true. The first movie is tense. The second movie is intense, right? It's the whole idea about like, where is the alien to? Oh shit, we're surrounded. You know, like everything's exploding. Now, because the thing that's cool about this one is The first movie, we saw normal people not prepared at all for the situation, so of course they get wiped out. This is a movie with the most gung-ho, armed to the teeth, fucking Marines, professionals. And when they start getting wiped out, you're like, oh, shit.
Well, and there's something to be said for the fact that we still haven't really seen a scenario in which people are going in expecting to deal with xenomorphs, right?
It's one of the biggest things in this movie that I think has really captured a lot of fans' imagination when they talk about, oh, guys, there's another fucking bug hunt. And you're like, what's a bug hunt? What have you been hunting, right? Like, that's always been a thing that captured my imagination as a kid, too, where you're like, what were the Colonial Marines doing before any of this stuff? And there have been plenty of books and comics and video games.
Yeah,
and that,
like the question around the Alien franchise is always like, how much alien life has humanity encountered out in the galaxy? Is this a singular, like, oh, weird, some kind of alien species that we've never seen before? Because everything we've seen of the like Weyland-Yutani colonies is always, these are mining facilities, right? Essentially.
Here's a big question I have for you that's going to determine a lot of where we go. Did you watch this on Disney again?
I did.
Did you? So you saw the theatrical cut?
Probably.
Well, here's the thing. Did you see Newt's family?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I've seen that cut in the past, but this particular,
I actually watched the theatrical cut of this for the first time. Probably not ever, but pretty close, because actually growing up, the VHS we had was the clamshell collector's edition that was the James Cameron cut. So I have always known the director's cut of this movie. So I watched it this time going, oh, well, like I knew the Newt's family stuff wasn't in it because for those who don't know, one of the big differences in the director's cut is you see Hadley's Hope functioning, and it is Newt's father actually who encounters the xenomorph for the first time. We see Newt's family, you establish life there, and all the stuff before it's overtaken by the xenomorphs, and then I'm
assuming that happens like after the cut where nobody's believing Ripley and before they go to see her in her apartment.
Correct. Yeah. In the theatrical cut, it just sort of feels like a time lapse, but there's an actual like narrative bridge there, which I do prefer. I do prefer the director's cut, which is 17. We talked about this. The Ridley Scott director's cut, there's a couple additions. He actually shortens a couple things. This is 17 minutes added back. So that's a considerable amount of time. The other thing that's a big difference is Ripley's daughter. I don't think she...
Right, whole mention... No, in the theatrical cut, she does not mention that she has a daughter, whereas in the director's cut, she like laments the fact that she basically missed her whole life.
Her daughter's dead, yeah. And in fact, actually, one of the cool things is they show her a file photo, and they use Sigourney Weaver's real mother to be her elderly daughter who had passed away, which I thought was a cool. So it looks like Sigourney Weaver.
And obviously, we've mentioned the game a lot, but Alien Isolation, of course, follows Ripley's daughter as the main character.
The thing about that, though, that I do feel like, and it's why I don't know, I'm so used to the director's cut that I am like, man, I don't think the movie's as good without that, because what you lose there is the obvious thing about a woman who lost a daughter and gaining a new one by the end of the movie, right? Cameron's whole pitch for the narrative arc of this movie is you basically watch this woman who lost everything build a new family with Hicks and Newt and Bishop, right? Like now she has this, you're supposed to have this family unit by the end of the movie.
In the first, as I was rewatching this film, and it had been years since I rewatched this film, I kept expecting that scene in the first half hour of the movie. And when it didn't happen, I was like, oh, that must have been the director's cut that I'm remembering.
I feel like of anything from the director's cut, that's the most important thing that I would vehemently, whether or not you've seen Newt's family, I personally like it, but you could talk about pacing issues there. But that feels like a massive mistake on the studio's part.
I feel like that is a big character arc hiccup, actually, in retrospect, having watching this film now, going through the whole thing. Like, obviously, Ripley's relationship with Newt is such the spine of the second and third act of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole impetus, and it's also previewing some of my issues with Alien 3. That becomes the whole last chunk of this movie is about saving Newt.
Right. So not having that I mean, look, there's a lot of implication that you get
Sure.
into, but in the theatrical cut, especially the one that's available on Disney Plus, there is not even a mention
Mm-mm.
of Ripley's daughter,
No.
and I feel like that's a big miscalculation in the pacing
It's a
or the emotional pacing of the film.
It's a thing where I don't think you. I once again, I've never not. I've always known that as part of the movie. So I can't imagine people in 1986 saw us in the theater and were like, I'm not quite buying this. But once you see it and then to have it, it's. I was talking about this with the Rogue cut of Days of Future Past. Of once you know it's there, it's not as emotionally integral, but it's like once you know it's there, it's now glaring that it's missing. If you go back and see the other, you're like, wait a minute, hold on, that's now. And it's a weird thing to cut. I would be curious to know what the reason for cutting that is, simply because it's a very small moment. It's not like it took up a lot of time in the movie. It's just a quick scene between her and Burke.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's just like her in the hospital asking after her daughter in that first interaction with Burke, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a small scene, and he's like, because it's after he first meets her, and he comes back, he goes, we did look up your daughter. She unfortunately died. They show her the photo of her as an old woman, and they also say she never had any children. So not only is Ripley's daughter gone, but her entire bloodline basically is over, is the thing. She has no one. Which also further adds to her, emotional distress, in addition to setting up the sort of maternal arc.
I was curious about this, so I did some digging. And if you take the first three movies timeline as like seen on screen without any real big precarious time jumps, though there is one like pretty significantly sized one in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in the first three Alien movies, from Ripley's perspective, happens over the course of like 10 days because of how much time she spends in cryo sleep.
That's true, because of course, I mean, we didn't talk, but yes, but the whole idea is when they and such a cool concept, obviously, right? Is when Burke tells her, "Yeah, you were out there for 57 years floating in space."
Yeah.
Since we've been talking about,
and I believe there's some kind of like I want to say there's some comic or novel that implies like, she was set adrift kind of on purpose.
I would not be shocked at all if that's the case, because all things in the Alien franchise basically do come back to like, the corporation actually set this up to fuck somebody over for their own gains, or
Mm-hmm. And actually, have you read the "What If Burke Survived"?
I haven't
comic
yet.
From Marvel?
I've been wanting to. I haven't read it yet.
I read it this morning.
Because Paul Reiser wrote that.
Because Paul Reiser wrote it. That is sort of a plot point in that book. I will say there is a significant time jump in that book because you hard cut from Burke survives somehow, and they come up with a decent enough excuse as to how he survived.
Right. Well, he could have. I mean, in this, he That's great. Oh, and that's such a Paul Reiser thing to do, because like Paul Reiser writing is obviously so much like character based things, like he created Mad About You. So let's talk about that, because for me as a kid, it was always like, the guy from Mad About You is in an Alien movie. Like I knew Paul Reiser because he was on TV on a huge hit sitcom, as a neurotic guy, and then here he's so good in this movie. Paul Reiser, I don't know that he's underappreciated, but I don't think he's talking about it. He's a very good actor. Like in terms of
Paul Reiser is exactly appreciated enough, John.
I'm just saying, like, I think it's a thing where it's like, in terms of stand-ups who have gone into acting, he's he's really good in this movie. He plays this part perfectly, because also it's more in that, what I was saying about Cameron so good at casting, that like Paul Reiser, you kind of want, he is likable in the beginning. You're like, okay, it's almost the reverse of Bishop, right? Where you're like, well, I don't trust the company, but you're like, this guy seems pretty genuine, and then you just
and that's why they can use him so effectively in Stranger Things, right? He has that affability of like, when he says he has the best intentions at heart, you want to believe him because he seems so genuine. But then as you start to peel back the layers of greed and like personal power and ego that build into a character like that, you're just like, oh, actually, fuck this guy.
Well, one of the cool things about using him in Stranger Things is then a reversal of this, right? Where I'm like, well, they're obviously probably fans of his from Aliens based on how they cast people in that show. So I'm like, is he going to be evil in this? And then he's not in that.
Well,
No, he's decent in that. On Stranger Things?
he was complicit in some terrible child experiments.
Uh yeah, less so than Matthew Modine, but sort of
Sure.
he's the guy trying to like, all right, this is happening, let me at least try to like minimize the damage.
Sure.
He's caught up in a negative thing, but he is in the story of the show meant to be helping Eleven's, story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, he ends up in this. What I like about this is the whole movie, you start to go like, all right, I think he's kind of an asshole. And then you start to be like, oh shit, he's like legit evil. Like, the big turning point is when he turns off the monitor of Ripley and Newt when they're attacked by the face hugger.
Yeah, because your read on him up till that point is like, okay, he's greedy, but he'll draw the line at actual human suffering.
Yeah,
and then when you realize, no, he's going to try to kill people.
He is the guy when the thing is just like, we take off, we nuke the place from orbit. I love his line later. He goes, "There's a lot of dollars invested in." He actually says dollars, which makes me, a lot of dollars. Whoa, he's like, whoa, yeah. Well, actually, we have a lot of money on the line here, and you go like, oh, fuck you, corporate douchebag. But you don't realize, and then he turns off the thing, and then the thing about when Ripley's like, you set us up to get infected, and that's how you were going to. And he's just like, hey,
What? She's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't believe this.
Yeah.
Come on, guys.
And Bill Paxton just wants to execute him. It's just like, I say we smoke him.
I'm on Team Hudson on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, Hudson's kind of a jerk and a goof and not particularly good at his job, but I'm kind of on Team Hudson on that one.
Paxton obviously is so good in this movie, and this really, I mean, he'd been in stuff before this, but this really sent him into like, people really took notice of him in this movie.
Oh, sure.
He's the classic, once again, I mean, Cameron uses a lot of tropes, but he uses them effectively. He's the classic guy panicking in the middle of the battle movie, right? The classic war picture guy who's like, oh no, man, I didn't know it was going to be this bad. Every scene with him and Bean, where Bean is just like grabbing him by the tactical vest and be like, shut the fuck up. You are not
Get it
helping.
together, Hudson.
Yeah. You are not helping me, man. Are you kidding me?
I mean, so weird that he would end up in Spaceballs after this, but
yeah, I know,
just
right? Another great Paxton, specifically Bill Paxton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially with the whole like alien goof they do in that movie.
I know, you would have thought he would have known about that. What had he done? I mean, he, like I said, he's
nothing.
He'd been in The Terminator briefly.
Yeah.
With Cameron. He had been in Streets of Fire, which is a movie I want to love more than I do. And the big thing he had done before this is he's the douchebag older brother in Weird Science. That was probably his biggest role prior to this. He gets turned into a pig in that movie, if anyone remembers. But this definitely launches him. And actually, the next year, he's in the Cameron-produced Near Dark, which if you listen to Meet the Monsters, you know we fucking love that movie over on. It's a great, also with Lance. It's basically Cameron produced that movie and put everyone from Aliens in that movie, because the vampire group is Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, and Jeanette Goldstein, who plays Vasquez in this. They then are the traveling band of vampires.
We'll see him again when we eventually get to Predator 2 as well.
Yep. He's one of the few who's been in both.
Mm-hmm. I always forget how many people are in Predator 2, because it's way more than you think.
It's a stacked cast in that movie. And, of course, he stays, like I said, he stays a Cameron regular. He'll show back up in True Lies and Titanic. And always when I talk about Bill Paxton, though, I get real sad because he died in a stupid way due to doctor negligence in 2017.
Yeah. I loved his turn on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as John Garrett.
He was great.
As the Hydra agent in that. That was great.
He's so fucking good in Edge of Tomorrow as well.
Mm-hmm.
Being sort of the opposite of this, the most hardened military dude in that movie. So Paxton, one of my all-time favorite actors, and he's great in this movie. He makes a meal out of it. He does have it makes sense that people were just like, "Who's that guy? That guy is great," and improvised a lot of the stuff. The famous knife scene with Bishop, where he's moving the blade between the fingers, great.
I don't know why, but I've somehow incepted in my brain that there is a version of that scene in which the knife goes through both of their hands. I know it never happens, but
that's your Mandela effect.
yeah, like every time I see the movie, I'm just like, oh, and at the end he slams the knife down through his hand, but no, it never happens.
That might be in a movie. I don't know. I mean, he's like,
yeah, I don't know.
There's a Simpsons joke where Homer's trying to do it, and he only hits his fingers. Ow, 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 ow. Yeah. She's like, Homer, no knife games at the table. I didn't hit your precious table. Just silly. But yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah. One of the cool things Cameron did on this as well is he let all of them adorn their own armor. So like all the stuff that's written, all the actors. So you get this sense of they all know what the meanings of everything on their suits are. And then the ultimate film nerd gearhead thing is him turning Steadicam rigs into machine gun mounting when they're wearing the giant guns.
Yeah.
That's just a Steadicam rig with a huge gun on it.
But what if the guns were steady too, John?
I mean, it's one of the coolest things. Right from when you see the two of them doing the with it.
It's such the whole opening sequence with the Marines is such like a indulgent military, like almost pornographic, like let's show all of our guns and us posing with our guns and all of our ships and tanks and guns and missiles and guns.
I mean, there's a reason that both 12-year-old and 35-year-old me is obsessed with it. Because that's just my shit, man. I don't know what it is. I have none of that in real life. I'm such a non-gun person, but in a movie, I'm just like, oh, fuck, Rambo's got the M60 now? It's about to go down. But that's the whole thing in this movie. And to this day, I still want a pulse rifle. It's still one of the coolest guns I've ever seen in a movie.
Nerf, for all of their weirdness, have done some really cool replicas over the last like 5-10 years in terms of like video games and film franchises. And they did a limited edition, like Comic-Con exclusive the pulse rifle. I wanted it so bad.
Yeah. They also make a phase rifle from Star Trek that I've looked at too. That's gorgeous.
They do a phase rifle from Star Trek. They do a bunch of Star Wars guns that are pretty good.
I've seen the Mandalorian rifle is awesome.
The Mandalorian rifle. I also have the Stormtrooper rifle.
Yeah.
I really love all the Halo replicas they've done.
I mean, they've done that's amazing, that stuff. I did see somebody on YouTube, because of course it's what my algorithm would point me towards. Somebody did make a live fire pulse rifle that actually did count down the bullets. And I was like, that is the coolest thing. Because that's the thing about it's the ultimate gun, right? It's a machine gun, but it has a pump action grenade launcher.
Sure.
And it's got a little digital dial that tells you how many bullets you. I mean, there's a reason that, like, I mean, that just went right into Halo. Speaking of Halo, right? The counter is just in those games. Like, Halo owes a lot to this.
It's such a video game thing, right?
No,
I know Doom comes out like 7 years after this film,
which is just 100% this, right? Like, I mean, no,
but with the devil, yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, and once again, it's not like Cameron invented the idea of space military stuff. I mean, because we've talked before about Heinlein and Starship Troopers and stuff like that, and all this stuff. But he just put it out there in such a way that captured everyone. That everything does kind of come back to this movie in the aesthetics of it, the types of vehicles, the types of weapons, the way these people present themselves.
Well, you kind of have to put this movie in context, right? Like 1986, we're dealing with a lot of filmmakers that are feeling the echoes of Vietnam, but aren't directly impacted by it.
Right.
So you have a whole generation of artists that have this aesthetic of what a Vietnam is in their head when it comes to like Marines out in some kind of unexplored territory.
Well,
doing what they have to do to survive and being this panoply of characters that like maybe started from a place of truth, but grew into something a little bit more outrageous, and that's how we get our Space Marines here.
No, I mean, we've talked about this all the time. 80s action movies are forever in the shadow of Vietnam. In fact, one of the seasons I know we're planning going forward is a season I'm calling Refighting Vietnam, where it was all just movies in the 1980s that were trying to put a happy ending on Vietnam.
Yeah.
But it's very telling that the Best Picture winner of 1986, the year this came out, was Platoon.
Yeah.
Which is maybe in some ways the ultimate Vietnam movie, or at least like the best, boots on the ground, firsthand account of it.
Well, even this is a Vietnam movie to some extent, because you
100%.
have soldiers sent into a situation that they don't fully comprehend, trying to fight an enemy that they don't understand the motives of. Like, the metaphors write themselves.
100%. No, this is, I mean, and Cameron has never denied that. This is in an era where they're making tons of Vietnam movies. This is part of it. It's just set in space and about aliens, but aesthetically. Right. Do you love Sergeant Apone getting out of the freeze and just immediately putting that cigar in his mouth? Boy, that tells you everything you need to know about that guy.
Look, Sergeant Apone is the great granddaddy of the Sergeant Johnson from the Halo series, who I am forever burned into my brain. But this, like, cigar smoking, hard bitten, usually black Marine sergeant is just this stock character.
I mean, another iconic thing here isn't his line about another glorious day in the Corps.
Yeah,
it's like that's another iconic thing. And once again, a guy who Apone goes out fairly early or ish.
Most of these guys go out in the first little,
but
when they make contact with the hive.
I remember Sergeant Apone because he gets this great introduction. You're like, man, all these people are playing their roles so well that you do start to remember all these people, even if they don't, immediately read as that. And so that leads me to, I just briefly mentioned her, but if I don't mention Vasquez, a character who also just captured my imagination as a kid, I loved Vasquez. I feel like I've ripped off Vasquez in multiple things I've written.
Look, Jeanette Goldstein is such a transformative actor in this, and then going into T2, obviously following James Cameron. Like, you almost don't recognize her.
Yeah, she's also in, once again, bigger for me as you would expect, but in between those two, she's in Lethal Weapon too,
Totally.
and Near Dark, as I mentioned. But immediately the way she's presented in this movie is like groundbreaking without being as in your face about it as a movie would be today.
Yeah, this is obviously, they're playing it over the top in terms of like, oh, she's one of the boys. And how is she one of the boys? By being manly and spitting and cursing and making fun of people's sexuality.
She gets up out of her cryopod and almost instantly is doing chin-ups,
Yeah,
she's the top. But I mean, it's like, you can read into her character a lot as being, because this franchise is so famous for having this amazing female action hero. But here's a woman who obviously has grown up in, and maybe not grown up in, but like has come to need to be an even bigger badass than the men. Maybe we don't really know what this futuristic military is, but you still get the sense it's a pretty male dominated thing. So she's maybe been forced to overcompensate. You could read a lot into her character as like she has to be even more masculine than the men.
Yeah. It is an interesting counterpoint to Ripley, who has this sort of quiet confidence until she has to take charge in the end of the second act.
She reads as more
Whereas
traditionally
Vasquez
feminine.
is sort of like putting herself out there as this domineering force. Ripley can kind of fade into the background a little bit until she absolutely needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah. And just, I mean, once again, the iconography of her with that fucking steady cam gun and the bandana, and she's written adios on the gun, and she makes it far enough and gets one of the more heartbreaking deaths in the movie. But early on,
her and Gorman going out together.
It's a good scene. It's a good scene of them.
In the What If Burke Lives comic, that explosion is what lets him survive.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to read that. I do really want to read because I
it's
love
fun.
That. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I love that Reiser wrote it. Like, that's just cool. I love when actors from stuff get involved in the creation of it like that.
Totally.
But that's the thing is this is the characters are a little bit more defined in this because in a way, but they're also they're both more defined but more cartoonish in a weird way.
Well,
because
they're
just because of
defined
the movie.
because they're stock.
Yeah.
It's like we were saying before, James Cameron is good at writing broad caricatures that we can easily identify and line up in our heads with, oh, this character equals A, this character equals B. We know sort of where they fit into the story math of the thing. I don't know if have we properly explained what we mean when we say story math.
I mean, if you lay out a movie, if you start analyzing the pieces of a movie so that they connect A to B, right, is sort of the equation that is a story.
Right. So the basic idea is that there are these stock characters that if you need a gruff drill sergeant, if you need an overcompensating funny guy Marine, you can slap those into certain scenarios and audiences will immediately recognize them for what they are and require no further explanation about those characters because they fit into these molds we have in our heads.
And I feel like my whole life on podcasts and media discussion has been in defense of these things, right? Has been in like, no, that actually is smart to start from there. It doesn't mean you just fall back on that and do nothing with it. But I think this is a perfect example of a movie that does that in a way that really works for the movie. It is, you know?
Well, because what this movie does that like bad examples of this movie don't do is we have this core character of Ripley and we don't shy away from her character development that carries over from the first movie. If she was just another stock character,
right,
then this movie feels hollow and empty. But because we have Ripley at the center as this beating heart of like maternity and overcoming trauma and trying to find yourself in a scenario that is literally your nightmare scenario, but overcoming, like, that's the beating heart of this film.
Here's one of the
Sigourney Weaver. We haven't really talked about her much, honestly, because I don't know how much there is to say other than she's fucking great.
I mean, one of the craziest pieces of trivia about this movie is she was nominated for Best Actress at the Academy Awards for this movie.
Deservedly
But
so.
that's insane. This is a science fiction action sequel that should immediately... It's still like one of the very few science fiction roles to be nominated, period, for any of the acting categories. Because famously, we know that things like Lord of the Rings won 11 Academy Awards, no nominations in the acting category, stuff like that. Like genre stuff just gets completely tossed aside, even if it gets recognized in other aspects of it. So it's incredible that because she is amazing in this movie. And like we said, she's so good in this movie and all of these movies, even the ones I don't like so much, the ones she's in, that I think I've said that. I believe I'm on the record saying I will not go back to the movie theaters to see an Alien movie unless they put Sigourney back in one. That would be the thing that would make me go, okay, yeah, you get my money again. Just because I've been burned so many times. But this franchise is ever in search of the next Sigourney Weaver. And I would argue that that's kind of the fool's errand that they've been trying to do every time. It's like, meet your new Ripley. And you're like, no, just create new characters. Don't try to make a new Ripley because you won't. Mm-hmm. It won't be, the character won't be as good, and the performance won't be that, because you end up, I feel so bad for all these actresses that come in, whether it's a Noomi Rapace or a Catherine Waterston, or I've not seen Romulus but certainly the way the promotion of Romulus has been is very much presenting Kaylee Spaney in a Ripley aesthetic, at least.
Well, there's this unavoidable trap that the filmmakers keep falling into is, look, you can have a woman as the lead of your film,
of course,
but you inevitably try to echo or try to make some kind of homage to the older films, and all that does is invite comparison and create these layers of, well, she didn't do this like Ripley would, or she didn't do this performance like Sigourney Weaver would. And by inviting those comparisons, you are immediately setting these actors up to fail.
And also, it's this weird feeling of, and I'm not saying, like, but like, what if you did make a man the main character of Alien? I only say that because it sort of seems like it's just like, well, that's just not done. And it's like, well, you're actually not being progressive by just going like, well, those are the rules. This is a woman-led franchise. You're like, yeah, but you keep casting the same woman, basically, whether whether
Well,
that's physically
they're
or
trying to, and I think that is part of the problem.
yes,
Is you're trying to cast echoes of Sigourney Weaver when maybe you shouldn't. May
yeah.
like you can still
Well,
have it
that's
as a
limiting
woman
to
as the lead,
yeah. Well, what
but
I'm saying
stop
is just
trying to make them a pale shadow of Sigourney Weaver.
I guess what I'm saying about like if you had a man as a main character, no, it's just like because every attitude they have, any suggestion, they'll just reject because it's like, well, that's not how it's done. It's like, well, could it be done a different way? Like they just get so, like I said, I think the biggest problem with this franchise as a whole, and this will be more the case going forward because it's still one of the great things is how different 1 and 2 are, but they get so stuck and they're like, okay, so that's what it is. Got it. It's just like, well, have you considered doing something else? That's why I'm most interested in the show, which I keep mentioning, Alien Earth, that's coming on, because it's like, okay, well, that number one's a show, so automatically, format-wise, it's different, it's long form, and two, it's set on Earth. It's like, and it's just like, okay, it seems like that's actually trying to do something interesting. The other one I was very excited about that, of course, I think both of us were, that never came to view was the Neil Blomkamp Alien movie that was going to be the sequel to this movie, ignoring Aliens 3 and 4.
Yeah, the more I've thought about that as a premise, the more I sour on the idea of it, just because I think it's doomed from the start. It's built on perceptions of hope, not and like a what if scenario that I feel like it could have never delivered on fully.
I mean, I don't know. We certainly don't know because it never
Right.
happened for any number of reasons.
Yeah, but it's just you're building all of these hopes on a what if. It's like the third Disney Star Wars sequel. Like you can read the Duel of the Fate script all you want, and you can see the promise in that over what we inevitably got in Rise of Skywalker. But would that movie have actually delivered? I don't.
Well, I mean, we know even less about but just the idea of like, oh, for me as a fan of this movie who was really disappointed. I mean, certainly there is. I don't know. It's certainly
Yeah,
more exciting than most other pitches I've heard though for things, and the concept art was
sure.
cool as hell. Old Michael
Yeah,
Biehn with the
yeah.
scarred up face and stuff from the acid, awesome.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
no. Look, could it have been a good? Probably, but I just don't
I
want
think it
to
would have
think
been.
about an imaginary film
No,
in which
I think
I
it certainly
am.
would have been a more exciting if that had come out. I would have been more excited about that than I was about Alien Covenant.
Well, because you would have seen it in theaters, because Sigourney Weaver might have been.
Well, that's the thing is Prometheus was the last one of these I saw in the theater because I was told that was going to fix the whole thing, and
But
they
even
fooled
the
me.
idea of fixing a franchise is so insane to me because it doesn't mean that the other entries in that franchise are suddenly gone.
No, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think the Alien thing would have been exciting in the way that the David Gordon Green Halloween was exciting to me, where it's like, all right, we're going to cut a lot of the stuff where this kind of got out of hand or complicated, or we have to keep bending over
Yeah,
backwards, and it was going to if not fix, simplify.
and obviously we'll get to
And as a
this
comic
film
book fan,
later
I
down the
love
road,
simplify. Yeah.
but Prey did that to a greater extent when you compare it to The Predator,
Well, I
right?
think
The
that's another
Predator
way. Yeah.
introduced all these like complicated concepts to the franchise, and Prey stripped it all down to what if a predator?
Prey does the thing I didn't think was possible, which is trying to get back to that first movie, right? Like, and we'll get there, but yeah, but like we've talked about, where the Alien movies have kind of struggled to like recapture. Prey actually did do that, which of course was also the impetus for why Romulus exists, was based on the success of Prey. Was can we do that? And although that's not doing the same thing, it's a whole thing. Anyway, this movie though is. Like we're saying, this is also a masterpiece in my opinion. I think these first two movies are basically perfect, both individually and in connection with each other. That's the other thing is I feel like this is the one where it's like, oh, now I see what the franchise is. Like the first movie, you go like, you could have another Alien, but this one does a lot with still implying a lot. But it does feel like now I understand the world this takes place in a little bit more, without it feeling like it's dumping world building exposition at the same time.
Well, because a lot of the world building is doing, like you say, is implication and it is extrapolation. When we
Yeah,
get introduced to Weyland-Yutani as this larger corporate entity that is financing basically all space colonization that
yeah.
humans do, as far as we can tell through these movies, And then you also introduce this idea of the United States still exists as some kind of function,
Right.
and they have a Marine Corps, but that is also supplicant to Weyland-Yutani and this corporate investiture across the galaxy. I mean,
Right.
it creates an interesting dystopian fabric that you can do a lot of world building, especially once you introduce the idea of synthetic humans and studying alien species. And obviously corporate skullduggery is always fun to play with.
Well, and that's the thing, is it firmly plants Weyland-Yutani. Now we have a name for the corporation, and it puts them at the center of, okay, that's the that's the villain, I should say. The alien is a force. And the reason they're villain is they're trying to use that force. You know?
Yeah.
They should have just left that thing alone, and instead they've brought that to us. That's why it's always been like, why have we not made a movie where the alien comes to Earth? It's insane that has not been a film. We'll talk about how Alien 3 was almost that movie. But that is the thing, is it's sort of like what this movie does is it adds details, it builds. It's a great sequel in that way, because like we're talking about, as much as it like changes genre and scope, it also builds on the first movie a lot. It is like, okay, if the corporation wants the alien, who is the corporation and why do they want it? And this movie gets into that.
But it also like pigeonholes that that want and need in a way that the franchise itself will struggle to grapple with going forward.
Yeah.
Like there's the line drop that Burke has in this movie of like, well, this would be worth a fortune to the bioweapons department.
Right.
And so that is how we eventually get to the whole Donnybrook of conflicting ideas in Prometheus, where it's like, okay, were these things always a bioweapon? Is that
Right.
why Weyland-Yutani wants them? And if that's the case, then like, who made them as a bioweapon? And then that's how we have to explain the engineers and the black goo and all this stuff.
You just hit me with that. We're gonna have to talk about the engineers on this show.
Oh yeah, we're absolutely gonna have to, because this movie doesn't have any of that, obviously.
No,
but we start seeing the xenomorphs as this larger gestalt construct, whereas in the first movie it was just big chap, eggs in a ship, facehugger equals big chap. Okay,
but
this, we start asking the question, what lays those eggs? Do we create a hive? The weird like hive stuff that we see in this movie is introduced here.
Yeah, well, and of course, as we know, that was in the Ridley Scott movie and then got cut, was the idea of the cocooning of the people. Because in this, though, we actually see that when before we see any xenomorphs proper, we see them find the cocoon person and the woman who's alive, and then the chest burster comes out of there, which is a great scene. And once again, the Sigourney Weaver moment of like, oh, fuck, it's happening again, right? And she's just like, get everybody out of there now.
Though in the cutscenes in Alien, the implication was once you're cocooned, you transform into a xenomorph. In this is you're cocooned so that you are immobile for when the face
which is, I like. That makes a lot of sense.
I like both, personally. I like the idea that like even a single xenomorph can perpetuate itself. It doesn't require a queen necessarily. But I think the queen and like the egg and the hive structure is also very alien. Pardon the pun.
It's the thing that's cool about this, once again, is, and I think it's where, once again, to preview future episodes, where I think some of the missteps are going too many answers. This movie gives you a few more answers, but more questions still. It's doing that thing I love about world building that we both love about Star Wars, too, where it like fills in some stuff, but opens new doors at the same time. And so you're still like, oh, they're still mysterious in this. Even though we see a lot more aliens and we get some information about how they function, we still don't fully understand them, and the idea that a corporation wants to control them. What they are is less important than what this company thinks they can do with it.
Yeah. We also do sort of run into something coined by a webcomic I love called Dr. McNinja, the inverse ninja law, which is you have one ninja and they are an unstoppable killing machine. If you have a horde of ninjas, you can plow through them like tissue paper. And that sort of is what happens here with the xenomorphs, is you have one xenomorph, they're an unstoppable force. We can never deal with this thing. It will kill all of us until Ripley shoots out an airlock. If you have dozens of xenomorphs, well, we can just start mowing through them with our machine guns. And yeah, one or two people might get caught with the acid blood, but for the most part, we can see heads exploding and we're fine.
In the defense of that, of course, they didn't have machine guns in the first movie. So had they, that would have been over like that. Got it.
We got them.
But they
did have flamethrowers, to be fair.
Yeah. But they also were people who just weren't trained in weaponry.
Yeah.
That's oh my God. And of course, that's the action figure I have of her is at the end of the movie when she has this flamethrower strapped to the pulse rifle. And you're just like, we're going to fuck shit up.
Let's duct tape two guns that are cool together to make an even cooler gun.
What's cooler than a gun? Two guns! It's like that thing. It's the my off-quoted line from John Woo's Hard Boiled. Give a man a gun and he's Superman. Give him two and he's God. Which is the most John Woo line. And John Woo himself says that in that movie. That's the thing that's great.
Yeah.
Playing the bartender in Hard Boiled, one of the greatest action movies ever. The whole thing at the end of the movie and it became the poster. We didn't talk about the poster, but like, talking about, once again, the exact opposite of the previous minimalist poster. This is Sigourney Weaver is the star of this movie. She's going to save this little girl. She's got the flamethrower pulse rifle combo on it. She's staring up at what we now know as the Queen. She's surrounded by eggs. And this poster tells you, this is a different kind of beast, man. This is not the Haunted House movie. This is an action movie about an action hero. This is a star movie. You are now coming to see Sigourney Weaver. Because this is also, not only has she done, Sigourney Weaver has just exploded. We talked about,
did she do Gorillas in the Mist between the two?
Was that between she did do Ghostbusters between the two, which certainly was huge.
Yeah, there's Ghostbusters. When is Gorillas in the Mist? That's after Aliens. That's the next year, or 2 years later.
Yeah, but she had done Year of Living Dangerously, which was big with her and Mel Gibson, and she had done Ghostbusters, which is obviously massive, like one of the biggest movies of all time, and then this. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple other ones on there that the less said about Deal of the Century, the better. I actually do like Eyewitness, the movie she made in 1981 with her and William Hurt, which is very underseen, but a good little thriller. She's certainly a known entity at this point. So this time it is like Sigourney Weaver versus the aliens, folks. Now you want to see this. We saw her the first time. What if she fought more this time? Like I said, it's just... also, we talked about, like... Alien is such a product of the 70s in its cast, in its presentation. Now it's the 80s, and people want action, man. People want to laugh, they want to scream, they want to see stuff, kick ass.
In the B version of this movie, Ripley is played by Cynthia Rothrock, right?
Yeah, 100%, right? Yeah. Well, because I do think, she's not literally the first, but Ripley becomes, we talked about this a little bit in the last, the prototype of the female action hero, right? Like the idea about she's not the first, but it was sort of one of the first times that people were like, oh. And even the movie, like we said, it was designed so that you didn't know she was going to end up being your hero. Now, this time, it is like, she's got her short haircut in this movie. She's in her T-shirt with the suspenders by the end of the movie. She's got a big gun strapped to her, and you're just like, fuck yeah. She's got the coolest shoes ever in this movie, which is it Reebok or Adidas? I don't remember which one.
I think it's Reebok.
I think Reebok. And a couple years ago, for one of the anniversaries of this movie, they did put out a line of those shoes, which I wanted to get, but they were prohibitively expensive. But they did actually make Ripley's cool future sneakers from this movie.
But what's also very good and consistent with this film, and the reason why you can build all of these stock characters around Ripley, is you have this character who is unimaginably traumatized by the first film. And this becomes a movie about her overcoming that trauma through the barrel of a gun, which is the action movie of the 80s. How do we solve our problems? By shooting them.
And I've read plenty of things about the problematic nature of movies I love, like Death Wish and stuff, where you solve your problems by shooting it in the face. And I recognize that but that's the fantasy of these movies to me, right? I don't apply that to the real world at all. Of course, a guy like Dirty Harry shouldn't be on a police force. But in a movie, it's awesome that, somebody's taking out the trash. I can separate those two. But the other thing I love about this, and I think this is a testament to Cameron's screenplay, and is he credited alongside somebody? Did he have a co-writer on this?
He has. I mean, he's credited with David Giller and Walter Hill
for story by. I mean, yeah, but sole screenplay credit goes to Cameron. So I mean, I'll mostly put it on him. One of the things that really works is she's not just movie one happened and now she's kicking ass. We still have to watch her actually evolve into the action hero. I love the moment, and it's late in the movie when she first fires that pulse rifle. Sigourney Weaver, the way she plays that thing gets away from her, and she's like, like, this is still just a woman who was operating a freight ship.
Yeah, she was a truck driver until 2 weeks ago.
I mean, I was talking to somebody about this. I'm going, in my movies, the movies I like, a romantic scene is a guy showing a woman how to use a gun. Because that scene with her and Hicks where he's like, meet the M40 pulse rifle. It's like,
feel the weight.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, and then you
that is the height of romance for one John Campbell.
Yeah, you hit the button and eject the mag, and you slam another one in hard. Like
really slap it in there.
Yeah, it's got a pump. I've always been obsessed with a pump action grenade launcher because that's so insane. Or I mean, and that's another thing too is I like that it's a romance without being an overt capital R romance, but there's like the moment when he gives her the tracker and he's like, don't mean we're engaged or nothing, and she kind of smiles at that, and you're like, they like each other. That's often one of my problems in a lot of action movies is people fall in love so fast in the middle of utter chaos. I don't.
You can present moments of chemistry without it progressing into like a passionate kissing romance.
Yeah, it's just like, no, that's the thing, and that's what I like in this movie is there's a connection between the two of them. This movie doesn't end in a kiss. It ends in them telling each other their first names. Another thing I think people forget, she doesn't become Ellen Ripley until the very end of this movie do we learn that she's Ellen Ripley, and he's Dwayne Hicks.
Dwayne.
Yeah. It's great. Like all this, it's just such a satisfying movie. There's a reason I go back to this one, You can. The first one is great, but this one is so much more rewatchable, right? This is
and you talk about like just the progression of her into action hero feels so natural, but also earned.
Yep.
In terms of like her hunting down Newt throughout the movie, and that's again why the whole daughter stuff I think is a weird misstep in the editing process here, because
big
you
mistake,
have her literally fighting another mother in the form of the alien queen over her surrogate daughter Newt, and it's like, oh, that's just good.
There's so many good little touches too. The moment when she points the flamethrower at the eggs and the queen stops, like, whoa, let's not get crazy now.
Let's not go crazy.
The queen design, by the way, I'm talking about, so fucking scary, so cool.
The way the main mouth comes out from behind the carapace is so upsetting.
Oh, it's so good. They also talked about the scene where it gets into the elevator. The puppet was way too big. They had to take the whole tail and back end off of it to fit it into the elevator set.
I did notice on this watch through there is a blink and you'll miss it moment when they first meet the queen where her head comes up and you can see a strut on the inside of the puppet.
Oh, there you go.
And I was like, oh, I see the puppet masters back there.
Maybe
it doesn't.
It's possible I missed it, or two, it's also possible that for the 4K that I have, James Cameron erased that because he's that kind of guy.
Yeah.
No, I will fix everything. And he's one of those guys who, True Lies and The Abyss both just came out on 4K and never even got Blu-ray releases because he was like, no, until I can frame by frame restore these myself, they will not be available in high definition.
Yeah, and he's a bit of a...
Yeah, but I'm glad that both of those, because True Lies in particular is one of my... I mean, surprise, Cameron's riff on the Bond franchise is one of my favorites of his, with Arnold, too. I mean, this is a rare Cameron movie. I am still shocked that Arnold hasn't found his way to Pandora yet.
They were bad guys. True Lies is so good.
True Lies is so good, and also a rare example of... Cameron can be funny. That movie's really funny. Yeah. I would like to see the dude lighten up a little bit. That my biggest.
Did he write that movie?
I think he wrote all of his movies, didn't he? That's a good question.
I
I'm pretty sure he wrote it.
I don't dislike Cameron enough to care about his career.
Fair enough. I am a guy who just am like, I just, like I said, he's his own worst enemy. I mean, yes, he did write True Lies,
Okay.
which is great. And like I said, I would also just like to see, for once, could you make a movie without it needing to be a rethinking of what movies are? Like, it just seems exhausting to be him. And I feel like he's a fascinating figure in film. This was not a happy shoot. If you've read about the thing, there was huge turmoil between him and the crew on this movie because
Shocker.
well, in England is a very different surprise society from us in general, but particularly the film industry works way differently because they just work differently in general. They do not.
Well, they have really strict like hours, right? There's
Yeah.
like you work your 8, you go home.
Yeah. And meet Mr. Perfectionist Jim Cameron, who also didn't want to stop midday for people to have tea and would and exploded and kicked over a tea cart. Was like, "You fucking lazy pieces of shit."
Ooh, you don't fuck with the English tea.
Did not win him any fans. He was pretty roundly hated by the crew on this movie, and he vowed never to shoot another movie in England, and he hasn't. But his attitude is because they're lazy, and they're like, "Well, he's an asshole." If
you're not going to respect tea time, Jim, you can go film in whatever bathtub you want in California.
Jim Cameron's attitude in general is sort of a, once again, and it's always that line between like, well, he's a genius and he's just so demanding, and it's just sort of like his attitude is like, you got a problem with that? Fuck off, man. We're doing something here. I got to do what I got to do, and if you can't deal with it, that's your problem.
I need to go to the bottom of the world
Yeah.
to find a alien, and I don't mean in the abyss. I mean I need to invent submarines and cameras that can go into the Marianas Trench.
I gotta say, I mean, that actually is the stuff I most respect, and if he just wanted to do that for the rest of his life, I'd be all right with that. Like, he's just so obsessed with all the underwater shit. But the guy's also burned through marriages like nobody's business. I mean, I think he's just a prickly dude, like, in general. I think he's just he's a real visionary guy, and as we know from many visionary genius people, that can sometimes be tough on a personal one-to-one level. Is it just like, I don't understand why you can't see what I am seeing? Like, it just is infuriating to him.
Because their perception of reality is different than the people who might be standing next to him who want to break for lunch.
Yeah, or thinking about things like, Jim, money is not limitless. Like, just like, you understand, you can't bankrupt a studio. And yet he's been, the whole thing is, well, don't bet against Jim Cameron because he does make people money.
I know you have not seen Avatar: The Way of Water, John.
No.
But I will say I was also one of the largest naysayers of just like, okay, Avatar sequels 10 years later. Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that movie more than once in theaters, and I've watched it a couple more times at home, and it's entertaining. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, I said the guy does take you on a ride. There's no question. Like, he knows how to, and I do think that is the nature of those movies. Is people are like, well, got to see what he's up to. I think both things can be true. Is that they don't have a lot of cultural cachet, but yet everybody goes to them. But I don't hear people talk, they're not talked about the same way that even a movie like this is. I feel like it's more just like, oh yeah. Like I said, those are the most, like, he's finally culminated in making theme park attractions, which is not, I don't even mean to say that it's disparaging. I'm not in the Martin Scorsese, they're not cinema camp, but it is just people want to go back to Pandora. He has created such a world that I do think there's just sort of a like, well, let's see what he's got for us.
But those movies are also such a synthesis of everything he's working towards to bring this conversation back around.
Yeah.
You can see the bones of it in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And even when it's just with the gearhead stuff, or even like how characters are moving through the world and respond to themes of family and loyalty and mistrust of corporations and environmental thinking. like all of that's in here
Oh yeah.
to a greater or lesser
It
extent.
it
And
always
so
has been, right?
the
Like, I mean,
Avatar franchise is such like a, well, what if I just took all of my ideas and slapped this veneer of originality onto it? However original it is
right.
up for debate, obviously.
Well, because he's the thing, but I would say he is doing the thing of, like, when people talk about him ripping stuff off, my biggest issue is not that he's ripping stuff off; it's his refusal to acknowledge that he's doing it. That
Yeah,
makes me like,
that's why I said it can be debated.
why not? Well, yeah, why are you an asshole about this? Because I'm not saying it like the guy doesn't have an original idea. He's doing what everyone does, which is he's stolen from a billion things, including himself. As we're saying, he's literally ripping off his own stuff too, and then building all those pieces into this new thing, and that's fine. It's just admit that you're doing that. Everyone does that. You know, Tarantino's the exact opposite, where he'll tell you where every single shot is a reference to some Italian film that you haven't seen. But like, oh, you don't see, man, that's a Sergio Corbucci reference, you know?
Look, if you steal from enough things, it stops being
Yeah.
theft and it starts becoming inspiration. Like, this is
100%.
how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. But no, that is the Cameron has been, like a lot of filmmakers, this is, you know, offset about many an auteur. He's been making the same film his whole career, basically. I mean, like, he's just, he keeps coming back around to the same ideas. And I get why he's going, why would I ever make anything else? Any story I could want to tell, I can tell in the world of Avatar. And I think that's true. I think that's also insane, but I think it's also true. I think both things are there, where it is like, yes, he has built a franchise that is made up of all the things he's interested in, so he can spend the rest of his days tinkering in that.
I think there's an important context or emphasis in that sentence that should not be ignored, and that is, tell any story that James Cameron
Yes, I
wants
think
to tell.
that's the key to it. It's not
any story.
No.
It's just the ones he wants to tell.
Exactly.
Can be told in that work.
It's so interesting because that is such the opposite of Star Wars, where like Star Wars sort of broke George Lucas as a creator. He was sort of forced, I guess I'm stuck in this universe, whereas James Cameron has purposely created a universe he just wants to live in forever.
Which honestly, as like a struggling writer myself, that sounds like the dream to me, from like a D&D kind of world building perspective. Just like, I want all of my toys around me and I can play with them as much as I want.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, people like us have always been like, I mean, we love genre stuff, so the idea that's like, oh god, I'm gonna be remembered forever for like the space thing, we're like, that's cool, why would you bitch about that? You made a cool thing and people want it, more of it. Yeah, man, I mean, like, you know, sign me up. I'd love to create a franchise.
The fact that Sigourney Weaver was able to break out of the whole like, well, she's a space hero thing, is actually really impressive for her. Like, obviously a lot of the main actors here were able to branch out and get away from that, but especially in these genre franchises, it can be so easy for these actors to get trapped in the genre they start out in. And the fact that none of the actors here really do, at least the ones who continue to work.
Right. I mean, they're, you know, they'll all be associated as icons of it. Your Henriksen and Bean and Weaver even. You know, there's a reason she keeps coming back to it. She's going to be in The Mandalorian and Grogu, and that's like, oh, cool, Ripley's going to be in Star Wars, right? Like, that idea of like, because she's just, I mean, so much so that the Simon Pegg movie, Paul, uses her as the villain in that. Cabin in the Woods, you know, like her iconography, but it has not limited her career by any stretch. I think she was also very smart to do, you know, the next genre thing she does after Alien is Ghostbusters, which is a comedy. She's a totally different kind of character in it. Her you know, contribution to the movie is way different. But then she goes from, after this, she does Working Girl, totally different part, and a rom-com. You know, I think she was very smart about choosing stuff that used all these different aspects of her personality and abilities, but never also like ran from being Ripley either, and kept coming back for sequels, and was always like, yeah, I put her and Jamie Lee Curtis in very similar categories, right? They both are defined by a beloved genre franchise, but never let that limit them, and always purposely chose stuff that showed off, once again, different aspects of their abilities, but never abandoned or turned on the thing that made them.
Yeah. I mean, I'll always remember she is the voice of Planet Earth.
Of course, you know.
She actually jumps on the narrator train pretty early on. Her first role as narrator is in like the early 90s. She does a bunch of animated stuff, and then from then on, like gets a lot of work where her credit is just narrator.
I mean, she has a great voice. I mean, there's no question.
Yeah.
She's very pleasant to listen to, and authoritative. Like she's such an interesting actor, right? Because obviously she's gorgeous, but yet that's not. She never became like a sex symbol, but was considered sexy. Like it's just she's got so many contradictions as an actor. She really is a true one of a kind in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very interesting. She's managed to not be pigeonholed.
Sigourney Weaver, good.
Sigourney Weaver, amazing. I mean, she's one of those people that, to this day, she's always one of those people that I'm psyched to see in anything. I'm very excited to see what she's going to be in Star Wars. I don't know. We haven't heard anything about her character in that.
I'm a little worried just because like Marvel misused her so much in the Defenders show, in my opinion.
Well, like Perlmutter, Marvel TV did.
That's fair.
She has not been in a MCU proper thing, so
that's yeah. But the last time she got involved in some of the big genre stuff that I love, it was kind of a letdown.
Yeah, but I trust.
Defenders had other problems, but
I trust the Fabs, man. That's all I'm saying.
Sure,
the Fabs has not led us astray.
You think New Republic person or Imperial person?
Oh man, I mean either way, awesome. I mean she's going to be an authority figure, right? Because I mean just that's her presence. She's an older actor as well. I mean it would be cool to see her get evil, right? Like to really, and she definitely so. I could see it going either way, but I'd like to see her as a fun,
or Dathomir Witch.
Well, I mean, I also did think about that. Is she going to be like a dark side Force user? Would be cool as well. There's so much, and that's what's great as we talk about. She's an actor with such range that she would kill any of those roles.
Or gender bent. What was the crazy old Jedi's name in the Thrawn trilogy? Cyboth.
Oh yeah. That'd be cool.
Who teams up with Thrawn and tries to turn Luke.
I mean, there's obviously so many rumors about these movies becoming some version of Heir to the Empire and stuff like that. We'll see.
I mean, look, they literally called Thrawn the heir to the Empire in the Ahsoka show. I don't know what else we're doing here.
I think, and now we're talking about Star Wars, because of course, but it always ends up talking about Star Wars. But I think the all the things have done a good job of pulling bits and pieces, and so it may be much like the Marvel movies with things like Civil War, Winter Soldier, pieces of Heir to the Empire without literally being Heir to the Empire.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the best way to approach it. Anyway, let's talk about what other people think, because you've heard us talk about it enough. We'll do a segment, as always, we call Highs and Lows.
What? Okay. Our last time we had our low was they thought the movie was boring. And we both had our issues with that and some of the points they brought up.
Yeah.
I really want the low this time to be, this movie's too exciting.
I mean, you're not far off from. I'll just say that. But,
wow. Okay,
but
well, pull that band-aid.
Yeah. Anyway, let's start with the highs on these are kind of boring because they're. But I'll just pick one here that I think.
Listen to the last hour and a half of us talking.
This comes to us from IMDb user Carflow, who titles their review "Gets Better Every Time I See It." I'm just going to add my voice to the chorus of praise for this movie. It is as near to being perfect as anything I've ever seen. I will not say that it is much better than Alien, which is just about near to being perfect also, but I do love all the characters in this movie. I've rarely seen a movie where all the characters are so well developed. Even most serious dramas seldom develop each character so completely. None of these characters are stereotypes. Even Paul Reiser is Burke, although the slimy company/government man villain is a prerequisite in disaster-type movies. Once again, he doesn't say this, but I will add see Giovanni Ribisi in Avatar. Once again, it's all still there, man. I would almost say that my favorite is Michael Biehn as Hicks. Agree. Just because I like his work and consider him to be underrated, and who I actually believe was who he wanted to be the evil military villain Stephen Lang character in Avatar initially. I believe that was initially written for Michael Biehn. I think, if I'm and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I believe that was the case, which would make sense. I feel like that would be who Cameron would want to put. Although, I mean, I love Stephen Lang and everything. But I also
Michael
like
Biehn as evil blue Catman in the second one. Okay.
I have a feeling Bean's going to wind up in one of those just because he's a Cameron guy.
Sure.
It just feels inevitable. Anyway, and Vin Diesel's going to force himself in there even if he hasn't been cast. Y'all, you remember that when he was like, I'm going to be in the next Avatar? And people were like, no, he's not. And then he was like,
he was. He was the big whale guy.
Yeah, remember me? I was in it. Yeah, I get. You know what? You can always say that, right, about those movies. Is like, yeah, I was in it. I'm one of those guys in the back there, the computer generated. Anyway, I also like Lance Henriksen as Bishop, William Hope as Lieutenant Gorman, Bill Paxton as Hudson, and of course Jeanette Goldstein as Vasquez. I liked all of these characters. I cared about their lives and deaths. The final scene for Gorman and Vasquez still chokes me up after seeing it many times. I am not ignoring Sigourney Weaver or Carrie Henn. Ripley is the template for the modern action heroine. In the 24 years since Alien, this was written in 2004, so few have been able to measure up to Sigourney Weaver's Ripley. Even in Alien 3 and 4, Ripley was still powerful, despite the third-rate quality of the movies. As for Carrie Henn as Newt, she was the emotional heart of Aliens. Cameron's ability to develop well-rounded characters does not detract from his ability to create great action scenes or to scare the audience out of several years of growth. 10 out of 10 stars. We didn't mention Carrie Henn. We briefly touched on Carrie Henn, who is it's one of the.
Sorry, John. Just sorry to interrupt, but I'm seeing here that your IMDb account name is Carflow.
Oh no, is it? Yeah, that's not another opinion. That's just me again. That does sound like. I mean, that is me. I just adore. I have a big poster for this movie right when you walk into my apartment. Carrie
Henn, we did not mention Carrie Henn.
Carrie Henn is great as Newt, of course, who is so much of the heart of the movie, and a great child performance, which is so hard, as we know, having seen so many movies with kids. Is this it? I believe. Did she just do the one?
I'm so happy to report that this is the only movie this child was in, and her life wasn't ruined by an early development career.
No, because I know she's a teacher now. She's a public school teacher.
Good.
But I just wanted to see. Did she? No, she never really did anything again. She is in some cameo thing in a 2020 animated movie that I don't know anything about, but yeah, she stayed a totally normal person. She's been married. She's married with a child. She works as a school teacher. I see her at like the reunion panels and stuff like that. She does the occasional convention. But yeah, this was it. It was just a total one-off, which I think has kept her an icon, certainly, right? In that way, it's just like she is Newt. That is all she is. She only played Newt. Mm-hmm. She and Newt are inseparable in that way. And like I said, Cameron got a great performance out of her that still feels like a real kid, without being annoying, because I think kids often fall into they're either super annoying in a movie or they read like an adult writing a child to speak like an adult. And I think Newt feels kid-like and real, and never am I like, get this fucking kid out of here, like I think in a lot of genre stuff that adds kids needlessly.
She does a good job of portraying the trauma of a kid who saw their entire life destroyed by these monsters.
Yeah.
And the way she begins to parrot Hicks and Ripley going into the third act and sort of parrots them like she would surrogate parents obviously builds the emotional bonds between those characters in a very effective way.
That's the thing that's so good in this movie is all the tiny little moments like we talked about. I love the moment where Hicks picks her up and puts her on the table so she can look at the map. I love her wearing the helmet and giving the salute, obviously, which is iconic. You know, it's like there's her saying affirmative to them, like the Marines say. You know, all that stuff is great, and it keeps her in. She's still a kid, but there's this heavy trauma on her that bonds her with Ripley. You understand why Ripley's so protective. It's not just because it's a kid. It's specifically this kid, and she feels a kinship with them. It's great. All right, let's talk about somebody who doesn't think this is good.
Right off the bat, they're wrong, but go on.
Yeah. Okay, this is kind of what I assumed this would be. Donald King is the name of this IMDb user who titles their review "Moronic Sequel to Alien." Ridley Scott once made a brilliant sci-fi film called Alien. Many years later, he made an equally brilliant prequel called Prometheus.
Okay.
I knew it was going to be a Ridley guy. One of these people, in the years between, people tried to make their own sequels. One of these people was a man called James Cameron. First, he decided to make his version sentimental by introducing an irritating child that kept screaming so Ripley could say dumb things to reassure it. By the way, it... Fortunately, spoilers I guess for the third movie, but of course, fortunately David Fincher had the brat killed off in time for his version. We'll talk about that's a huge problem I have with that movie. But anyway, Cameron also decided he would have the film dominated by a group of U.S. Marines. These Marines were to have a combined IQ of about -5. All the Marines said things like, "Let's go," and "Oh my God, what is that?" Most irritating was Bill Paxton. Shame on you. He ended every sentence with the word man. Fortunately for the viewer, the aliens soon disemboweled him. The heroine of the film was...
survives to the third act. Whatever, go on.
Yeah. The heroine of the film was to be given lines just as bad as the Marines. The aliens were not scary, no matter how many there were. The spaceships looked secondhand. After an hour of this one, my eyelids began to close. The Marines shot at the aliens with their huge weaponry. Lance Henriksen got his head blown off, but carried on talking. Nope. Happily, when the Marines were killed, death applied to their tonsils. 2. After this success, Mr. Cameron got to make a 3-hour-long film about a ship that was perfectly designed. It sank. 1 out of 10 stars. And there's a lot. Basically, this is the tone of a lot of them, which is just like, after the highbrow, intellectually brilliant, thinking man's masterpiece, you get this stupid, gung-ho, 80s action movie full of guns. This ain't art, this is sort of that kind of attitude.
Sure. Yeah. No, and look, it's a dismissive tone we hear a lot when action films are discussed, right?
100%.
If things blow up, you can immediately dismiss the film as stupid. And that is the opinion of a lot of people who, I don't know, I feel like there is a disregard for action films because they're not... looking at them right, in at least from my perspective. Like, they don't appreciate the ballet nature of like how all of this has to fit together to create this on this roller coaster, this performance, this experience, and how all the actors are challenged to try to find emotion in those moments. And that's what makes a great action film, right?
The story is told through the actions of the characters, not just... It doesn't just mean guns and explosions stuff, but it's just a movie where the physicality is telling you the story of what people are doing is progressing the plot over other things. I mean, it doesn't mean that's the only thing it's doing, but like, action movies are a lot like musicals in that way, right? And you have these set pieces that carry the movie forward, whether they be song and dance or action sequences. Look, you're talking to the right guy if you want to defend the action genre, obviously.
Sure. I understand where this person is coming from. If they so deeply are connecting with the first movie, this does feel like a reverse in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Now, to say that the appropriate sequel is the film Prometheus gives me pause.
Yeah, I mean, look, like always, art is subjective. It's okay to like a movie. I can understand. Yeah. However, the idea of this being dumb and Prometheus being very smart, I'll just say that's not the conventional opinion.
And I'm not going to shit all over Prometheus all day, every day.
No.
I have my issues with that movie. I think it is like baseline fine.
Yeah,
it doesn't do anything like egregiously bad.
No, I don't think it's like god awful, but it's definitely like it was hugely disappointing when it came out because it had a lot of buildup. And I do think, but a common complaint of it is that it's dumb or that its characters are dumb. So I will just say, it's interesting. It's just interesting. I also think, once again, like the idea that they say things like, let's go. Oh, yeah, terrible line for a Marine to say. What are you talking about? Okay. Anyway, we're going to actually, though, going into next week on the show, we're going to take a little bit of a break from Alien because this is a series about 2 different movie franchises. And it's time to introduce. And it was really interesting the way these, just going chronologically, how these pair up as we get 2 aliens followed by 2 predators before they start switching on and off and eventually, of course, combining. But as always, I'll give you the tagline for next week's movie. Nothing like it has ever been on Earth before. It came from another planet for the thrill of a hunt. It picked the wrong man. Schwarzenegger. Predator.
Man, I can see that poster in my head.
Yep.
Like the Schwarzenegger with like the weird optical effect and the jungle behind him with just the Predator logo.
And this, of course, once again, where we talked about Alien, like, came out of nowhere. This, as you're talking about, like, in gigantic Schwarzenegger. This is a movie star movie, which is interesting because this movie star will only be in the first one.
Yeah.
This is for a franchise that starts with a movie star movie. That movie star does not carry over as the face of that franchise. Is very interesting.
The fact that that franchise, Predator specifically, doesn't really have a face associated with it is one of the interesting things going forward, and we'll get into.
Yeah, they actually avoid that. We'll talk about, but they avoid the Ripley pitfall. They don't just keep trying to re-up an Arnold type in the movies. Weirdly, they're way different protagonists in each one. So, the Predator franchise is interesting. I definitely think we're not going to hear a lot of people go like, the intellectual genius of the first Predator. This thing starts in the realm of aliens for sure. So,
well, the fact that we have like 2 back-to-back action movies, I think, is interesting. On the trip we're taking across these 2 franchises that eventually become intertwined. The fact that we go really kind of like still horror movie, action movie, hard-boiled crime thriller.
Yeah. Well, because I think that we'll talk about this, but going forward when we start in on Predator obviously is an action franchise from the start. Action will always be the key thing there, and sci-fi is more of the aesthetics of it than it is in the actual. Like, it is definitely, let's go shoot a fucking monster, man. So that'll be next week on the show. Of course, you can check us out online if you want more from us. We have a Patreon page, which you should definitely check out, patreon.com/punchupent. That's punchupent. Head over there for our related case episodes, of course, where we also do bonus episodes of this show where we talk about things that aren't directly part of franchises but are either inspired by or feel a part of or ancillary to, in some capacity, the franchises we talk about on the main feed.
A related case, if you will.
That's how that works, yeah. And, of course, you're going to want to make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@punchup.
youtube.com/@punchupentertainment. There you can find all of our shows, including you and I over on May the Panel Be With You, where we're talking Star Wars comics. If you want to hear us talk really in depth about some Star Wars bullshit, go check out that show. And in fact, you can read along the comic with us while you're there.
And if you like horror stuff, you can hear me and Brendan Jones talk every week on Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters, where we watch classic monster movies.
We also have Material Components and Gimme 5 with John interviewing rotating folks he knows from entertainment and other sundry mediums.
Indeed.
But while you're there, please like, comment, subscribe. All that stuff really helps.
Indeed. But I think that's going to do it for this week's episode of the IP Squad. Until next week, the case file is closed.